Sorry, excuse me, I ordered a chicken sandwich. I didn't order a burger. Yes, here's your chicken sandwich. No, that's a burger. I mean, I don't really see the problem. It's chicken between two pieces of bread. That's a sandwich. I understand the confusion, but nobody really calls that a sandwich. I mean, if I ask my friends if they want to get sandwiches, nobody's going to imagine burgers. Then you're arguing about what people happen to call it instead of what it actually is. If I put turkey between bread, it's a sandwich, and if I put ham between bread, it's a sandwich. So why does chicken suddenly stop being a sandwich the moment the bread becomes round? Hi everyone, welcome back to the Anna-losophy Podcast. Today we're talking about pragmatism. And before we begin, I want to mention something quickly. One of the reasons I've always found pragmatism interesting is that questions like these were some of the very first philosophical questions that grabbed my attention. It's not because it was genuinely the biggest question in philosophy, but it's because they start from situations that seem very ordinary and then slowly but surely become a lot more deeper and meaningful than you expect. You can start with something as simple as a disagreement over whether burger counts as a sandwich. At first, it sounds like an argument that's not worth fighting for or against. The debate itself, actually. And then somebody asks why. Suddenly, people are discussing definitions, then they're discussing language, and before long, they're discussing whether words get their meaning from dictionaries or from the way people are used in everyday life. Before you know it, a conversation that started at lunch has somehow become a conversation about knowledge itself. What I find fascinating is that most philosophical traditions respond to these situations by trying to discover the right definition. Pragmatism, though, takes a pretty different approach. The pragmatist wants to know why the definition mattered in the first place. What changes depending on the answer? What practical consequences follow from one conclusion instead of another? And today, we're going to explore how this movement emerged, who created it, why it became one of the most influential schools of thought in history, especially American history, and why its ideas continue impacting everything from science and education to politics and everyday decision-making. I've divided today's episode into 4 sections. P-R-A-G, Prag. P is Peirce and the origins of pragmatism. R is results and the philosophy of William James. A, always learning with John Dewey. And G, growing through constant inquiry. Together, these 4 sections tell the story of a philosophical movement, and it's one that certainly changed the way many people think about truth, knowledge, and the purpose of philosophy itself. The first section is P, Peirce and the origins of pragmatism. And to first understand pragmatism, we first need to understand the world that produced it. In other words, we need some historical context. The movement emerged in the United States during the late 19th century, and in a nutshell, it was a period when society was changing at a remarkable pace. Railroads were developed, factories transformed entire economies, and the expansion of cities was very quick. Scientific discoveries also appeared very frequently. Perhaps one of the most famous is Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. It challenged many assumptions that people previously considered unquestionable. At the same time, though, philosophy often appeared very different. Philosophers were still debating questions that had existed for centuries, and they still do now. What is reality? What is truth? What can human beings actually know? Now, these were very fascinating questions, but many disagreements seemed impossible to resolve. One philosopher would write an argument, another would respond, and then the third philosopher would criticize both. Decades passed. Sometimes entire generations passed, yet the debate still continued. One person who was very interested in this was Charles Sanders Peirce. And Peirce is generally regarded as the founder of pragmatism. He was not only a philosopher, though, he was also a scientist, mathematician, and logician. This mattered because it really impacted the way he thought about knowledge. Peirce spent much of his life observing fields where constantly people tested ideas against reality. Scientists proposed explanations, conducted experiments, corrected mistakes, and gradually improved their own understanding and spread their knowledge to the people around them. I mean, the process was imperfect, but it still generated good results. Peirce began wondering whether philosophy could learn something from that approach. Instead of arguing over definitions and things that were pretty abstract, perhaps philosophers should pay attention to the practical consequences of ideas. And this insight eventually appeared in an essay called How to Make Our Ideas Clear, published in 1878. In that essay, Peirce introduced what became known as the pragmatic maxim. The principle is pretty simple. If you want to understand the meaning of an idea, examine the practical effects that would follow if the idea were to be true. The more you think about this principle, the more significant it becomes. Imagine two people arguing about this abstract concept. They spend hours discussing definitions, theories, and classifications. But Peirce would ask a very straightforward question, but it was also kind of deceptive. What difference would it make if one side was correct? How would experience change? And what observations would become possible? What actions would follow? And by forcing people to connect ideas with practical consequences, Peirce believed that due to this, philosophy would become clearer and more productive. What makes this approach very interesting is that it changes the goal of philosophical inquiry. A tool gains significance through what it allows people to accomplish. Think about a map. Nobody values a map because it looks impressive or beautiful. People value maps because they help them navigate to the place they want to go, or they want to explore. In a similar way, Peirce believed concepts gain meaning through the role they play in helping human beings understand reality. And this perspective was a major change. For centuries, philosophers had often searched for certainty by moving further into abstract theories and just abstraction in general. Peirce suggested that understanding might actually improve when philosophy moved closer towards experience and the practicality behind things. And although meaning wasn't something completely detached from human life, meaning actually became more prominent through interaction with the world. And although pragmatism began as a philosophical theory, it eventually influenced fields other than philosophy. A lot of scientists, educators, psychologists, political thinkers, and social reformers all found aspects of pragmatism pretty appealing and interesting. Yet, none of that would have happened without Peirce's original insight that understanding an idea requires not only understanding its principles, even though they are important, but also understanding its consequences and the practicality. The section 2 is R, Results and the Philosophy of William James. Peirce founded pragmatism, and William James transformed it to an international movement. James, it's very hard to describe him. He's actually very brilliant. I think James possessed a very rare ability to take complicated ideas and make them accessible to the average reader. He was a philosopher, psychologist, lecturer, and public intellectual whose influence extended a lot beyond universities. While Peirce often wrote for specialists, James wrote in a style that allowed a general audience to engage with philosophical questions, even if they're difficult. One reason James became so influential is that he focused on problems people face every day. Human beings rarely possess complete certainty when making important decisions because oftentimes you're under pressure as well. We choose careers without knowing exactly how they'll turn out, and we form friendships without guarantees, pursuing opportunities without complete information. But that's just the unpredictability of life. Life constantly forces us to act despite uncertainty. But James believed that philosophy should address this reality rather than pretend that it doesn't exist. This concern appears clearly in one of his most famous essays and one of my personal favorites, The Will to Believe. James became interested in situations where waiting for perfect evidence may prevent action altogether. And imagine a student considering whether to audition for a school play. I mean, no matter how hard they try, they don't know 100% whether they will succeed. They don't know whether they will enjoy the experience. They don't know what other opportunities might emerge or what's going to happen that day. If they wait until every uncertainty disappears, they won't audition anyway. Eventually, they must act without complete knowledge. James found situations like this philosophically fascinating because they show an important relationship between belief and action. Human beings often imagine beliefs as passive descriptions of reality, but James argued that beliefs can also impact the way people engage with reality. Although confidence doesn't guarantee success, complete self-doubt can also prevent people from even attempting things they might actually achieve. In many situations, beliefs influence possibilities before the outcome even happens. This perspective helps explain his understanding of truth. Although pragmatism is often misunderstood as the claim that whatever works becomes true, James never argued that reality changes according to your personal preference of what happens. For example, gravity remains gravity regardless of what anyone believes. Scientific facts don't disappear just because someone doesn't like them. But what James questioned was how human beings determine which ideas deserve trust. In other words, why do certain theories survive while others don't? science provides an excellent example. Scientific theories gain credibility because they always demonstrate their usefulness in explaining observations, predicting outcomes, and solving problems. Let's look at the germ theory. It really changed medicine and the medicine department because it successfully explained patterns of diseases that people regularly get. And evolution constantly changed biology because it connected countless observations into this coherent theory. And these theories earned authority through their interaction with reality. Many people actually consider it to be fact. What I find especially interesting about James is that he makes knowledge feel alive. That's a weird word to say, but genuinely, he makes it feel alive. Because knowledge, nothing is final, and it's not always going to be preserved forever. We might think it will be, but we never know. It's an ongoing process. And like a scientist, we develop hypotheses, constantly experiment, and no matter how many times we fail, we keep doing it until we get it right. Human beings develop explanations, test them, revise them, and improve them. And understanding grows through experience and doing it over and over again, trial and error. In many ways, James really changed pragmatism from a philosophical method into a general philosophy of life, which helped people relate to it even more. Section 3 is A, Always Learning with John Dewey. So if Peirce created pragmatism and James popularized it, John Dewey expanded it into a very comprehensive, unified philosophy of education, democracy, and social progress. So he also kind of brought politics into it. Dewey may actually be arguably the most influential pragmatist in terms of everyday impact. A lot of educational ideas that seem completely normal and okay today owe an enormous debt to his work. To appreciate why, imagine a classroom from more than a century ago. Students often spent loads of hours memorizing information, reciting facts, and repeating lessons. Learning was frequently treated as the transfer of information from teacher to student. Dewey believed that something important was missing from this model. He argued that genuine understanding develops through active engagement. It shouldn't be just through reception, and especially not passive reception. A person doesn't simply or truly learn by just hearing information. They learn by interacting with a lot of things to truly understand it, like problems, testing ideas, making mistakes, and reflecting on the experience to do better next time. And I think one of the best, most relatable examples is learning to ride a bicycle. You could spend weeks studying diagrams, explaining like balance and momentum and the science behind it. You can memorize every technical detail. Yet eventually, you have to get on that bicycle. The moment you begin writing, there's a different kind of learning because it's not just the theoretics of science, but it's actually doing it as well with that information too. And you wobble, adjust, fall, recover, and gradually improve. The knowledge becomes meaningful because it emerges through more experience. Dewey believed that much of human learning follows this pattern as well. For example, as students, we understand ideas more when we encounter them through inquiry and problem solving rather than simple memorization because it's appliance. And this insight changed educational theory throughout the 20th century. Schools increasingly adopted approaches that emphasize projects, whether it's individual or group, a lot of discussion, experimentation, and on top of that, active participation. What makes Dewey very interesting is that he extended these ideas beyond classrooms, but he viewed society generally itself as a learning process. Communities encounter problems, propose solutions, evaluate results, and make adjustments. Democracy, in his view, was a method through which societies collectively learn and improve, which shows one of pragmatism's most appealing qualities. Although it rejects the idea that humanity will someday discover a final set of perfect answers, it really embraces and takes into account that we can improve constantly. Every generation inherits knowledge from the past, contributes new insights, and passes them forward. And progress is a process. I mean, we never know whether we'll reach a final destination or not, but that's not the main goal. It's to really have progress and grow and improve. Speaking of growing, section 4 is G, growing through constant inquiry. The final lesson of pragmatism does bring everything together. At its heart, pragmatism is a philosophy of inquiry. It begins with the recognition that human beings live in a world full of uncertainty and change. But rather than treating uncertainty as a failure on us, pragmatists treat it as the starting point for further investigation and again, improving and learning. When people encounter a problem, they ask questions and they try to gather information, testing possibilities and revising their assumptions. This process is really the cause for scientific discovery, innovation, progress, as well as growth on ourselves. So inquiry is one of the most important ways human beings try to figure out reality. Pragmatism, though, manages to be both very ambitious but also practical. On one hand, it insists that ideas must prove their value through experience. But on the other hand, it views inquiry as one of humanity's best achievements ever. The ability to question assumptions and learn from mistakes, that is, allows individuals and societies to improve over time. And I think out of all philosophical ideals, pragmatism remains relevant today because we live in an era that's full of information. There is media, and every day people encounter claims about politics, economics, science, tech, and culture. So the challenge is no longer simply obtaining information, because many people do have access to some kind of information. The challenge comes from evaluating it and interpreting it. Pragmatism encouraged us to ask useful questions. What evidence supports this claim? What consequences follow from accepting it, and how well does it explain reality? Does it help us understand the world more effectively? And these questions don't provide automatic answers, but at least they do help guide inquiry in more directions and discussions. Rather than becoming trapped in a lot of arguments over labels and abstractions, pragmatism encourages people to examine consequences, evidence, and experience. So as we conclude today's episode, I think the lasting significance of pragmatism is based on the way it changed philosophy and redefined it as well. Peirce, James, and Dewey all challenged philosophers to connect ideas with practical consequences and knowledge with actual human life that we can apply in order for us to relate to it more, but also understand it more. Even more than a century after its emergence, pragmatism continued to remind us that ideas matter, not only because they can be discussed, but because they can also be used in everyday life. Comment what you think. Do you think a burger is a sandwich? It's a very contested debate. But understanding the world is important, and learning how to go through it and navigate it may be just as important. So thank you guys for listening, and as always, keep reading, keep questioning, and keep thinking. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!